outsider, caught a weaving spider. Circle is evil, circle is evil. So the girl's higher, she's a cubicle powder. The sands of time, the keeper of time, the captain's eye.
So, Mr. Rather, in your book you go into some detail, really, about the effects of the corporatization and the concentration in the American media. Tell us a little bit about what you think the effects on that are for journalism, first of all.
Well, we begin with the fact, and it is a fact, that a free and independent, truly independent, fiercely independent when necessary press is the red beating heart of freedom and democracy. So we start from that foundation. For quite a long time in this country, we had a situation where, in general, there was a compact, not a contract, but an understanding between those who headed the, at that time, large corporations, which had as a part of their corporate entity a news operation. There was a compact that said, listen, we're capitalists, we're in business to make money, we're here to make money, but we agree that in terms of news, that a news organization is a public trust. And we, the very top of the corporation, want to be responsible to that trust. At least some small part of what we do will take the view that our news operation is separate in many important ways from the corporate entity and will be operated in the public interest. Yes, if it makes money, we'd be delighted, but that's not why we do it. We do it to meet the responsibilities of the public trust. Now, what's changed is that any reference to public interest has just about disappeared. And that's a signal change. That's a big change.
Do you consider that a violation of the public trust?
I do. I do consider it a violation of the public trust. Another perspective, another way to look at it, is that news organizations, when I say they were operated in the public interest, at least part of the time, they were considered institutions that were important to the vitals of the country, including our Constitution, including the foundation of a free and independent press. What's happened in the banking industry, in the insurance industry, the healthcare and hospital industry, has also infected the news industry, which is today, having said that any talk of operating a news operation as a public trust has all but disappeared. That, and I'm pausing only because I apologize for this language is necessary. Very big business is in bed with big power in Washington for their mutual interest, not in the public interest, in their interest. That the large conglomerates who operate on a worldwide basis and for whom news is only a very small part of their overall business. Consolidation of media in this country has reached the point where no more than 6, my count is 4, of these conglomerates control something more than 80% of the true national distribution of news in this country. Now that's important because the leaders of these very large corporations, they have business that they want out of the powers that be in Washington, whether Washington be led at any given time by Republicans or Democrats. And, of course, those in power in Washington want things from the leaders of the corporations. They'd like to have sweetheart coverage. At the very least, they don't want reporters mucking around, digging deep, and exposing malfeasance, if not something worse. So that's the point we've reached today. And yes, I do think that this is a violation of the public trust. And I do think that it's important, not just for journalists and journalism, but for the public at large to understand what has happened, why it has happened, and why they should care about it.
So you think there's a kind of quid pro quo within the American elites to make sure that they don't ruffle each other's feathers, more or less, and that feeds
in
into
essence,
the media?
yes.
So what? Give us some examples.
Well, an example would be that in the case of one of the large American networks was until very recently owned by a company that did a lot of defense contracting business, a huge part of their overall corporate business. They were competing for contracts. They certainly did not want any deep digging into how contracts are awarded. And you saw very little coverage of that. In fact, almost none.
Do you think the coverage of this most recent financial crisis and the coverage that might have highlighted that crisis beforehand, do you think that that may have been a kind of casualty?
Yes, I do. But now, with what I think and not what I know, rarely is it a case of the very head of the corporation sends down word to the news division, lay off the story. It's implicit that if you want to keep your job, if you want to stay in good standing, there's certain areas you just don't wander into. This is my opinion based on my experience and my own personal knowledge.
So, as a news anchor for several decades, did you feel that implicit self-censorship? Did you have that feeling?
The honest and candid answer, which I always try to give you, is yes. But it's hard to say exactly when it started. I did not feel it for the whole time that I was there. That this has evolved over years, the situation we have now, but it was slow, almost imperceptible. But the best case in point is when we at CBS News, and we broke the story of the abuses at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. That story was delayed and delayed and delayed. And let's pause and point out, this is a very important story. And without being self-serving, I would say was one of, if not the biggest stories of the year. But there was a delay in getting that story on the air.
Why?
Well, each time they had a reason. They would say, well, we just need to explore it a little further. And we said, listen, we have the information, it's rock solid. We have the pictures, it's rock solid. So definitely during that time, there wasn't any question that I came to believe, and keep in mind this was hard for me to believe, because I spent 44 years at CBS News, believed in the institution. But it was very clear that they didn't want to run this story. And I don't think they would have run it, except some of our sources took the view, listen, you're not going to run this story. They began talking to other investigative reporters, and the company was then put in a position, listen, if we continue to decline to run this story, we're going to look like hell when somebody else breaks it and has found out that we've had it here for a month. But that would be one example. But here's the point, that this came slowly over a period of years, and it was just one slow step at a time. And I want to emphasize that, I have things to answer for myself with this. I do not accept myself from the criticism, and there are no excuses. But it's a reminder that you want to be careful about what you get used to, because you can get used to anything. So it came so slowly over a period of time. You say, well, this doesn't feel just right to me, but you know what? I believe in the institution. I believe in the people. I believe in the people who are with me. And so we'll just sort of glide past that.
That trust that you put in CBS was quite publicly ruptured over the Bush and the National Guard story. And there was one email exchange in particular that I thought was revealing from your book, where one of the higher-ups says, let's not forget Dan's story is true. And another says, that's no longer the point. We've offended the President of the United States. When you saw those emails, what did you think?
I was surprised to the point of almost being astounded. The reason that I went to court, which was a very reluctant decision by me, was to find out what happened, what really happened behind the scenes, why the company caved when we reported the true story about what a young George W. Bush had and had not done in terms of meeting his military service obligations. That if you had told me before I saw those emails that anybody at CBS News or the corporate entity would have said, yes, of course the story is true, but that's not the point, I wouldn't have believed it. Nor would I have believed other revelations, such as that the president of the CBS News division was taking directions about how we would handle the story situation, from the chief lobbyist for the corporation. I had grown up at a CBS News where that would not have been, not only would not have been allowed, I don't even think it had been thought of. But what this says, it's less important what it says to me in my own situation than what it says to the public, because they acknowledge privately in the emails, yes, the story is true. The corporate entity says, that's not the point. That raises the question, then what is the point? And I think the answer is self-evident. The point is that those in power in Washington, the Bush administration, they hate this story. It's a true story. They're attacking it because it's inconvenient truths, very unpleasant truths that they think are harming them politically. And they want, not only do they want to put a stop to it, but they want you to disavow it, which they did.
So your time at CBS, it sounds like a little bit like that parable of the frog in the boiling water, and you just keep turning it up a little bit. It doesn't know when it's boiling, and then it dies. And I wonder if there is something about that with the public at large. Why are people not up in arms about this? Why are people not doing anything about it? How has this been able to happen?
I think it's been able to happen. One, because it has come slowly, almost imperceptibly. Two, because it's so widespread and pervasive. And three, let's have it out for what it is. I think there's a lot of fear. I think that journalists are somewhat afraid to talk about this, because if you talk about it, those who don't want it talked about have a clear signal. Their clear signal is, if you start raising these questions, if you start pointing these things out to the public, you are going to pay a price. We will destroy you if we can. And if we can't destroy you, we'll try to damage you and your reputation so much that you'll have no credibility. With the run-up to the Iraq War, I'm talking now about Gulf War II, that there were plenty of questions to be asked about what the most powerful people in government were saying was the justification for going to the war. With few exceptions, those questions didn't get asked. And I know it's not a question of just I think. I know that one of the reasons was fear. And if you're at a news conference where the President of the United States is saying something, it may occur to you as a journalist to get on your feet and question it in a fairly aggressive way. But what happens is you sit there and you say, if I get up and ask that question, or if I ask a tough follow-up question on some previous question that was asked but not answered, they're going to hang a sign around my neck, by the way. Doesn't support the troops, unpatriotic. How dare he question the commander-in-chief who has more information than all the rest of it. All of that is going to happen. And so that eats away at your own professional integrity and what you see as your professional responsibility. I don't want to overstate it, but I don't want to understate it either, and I think the public needs to understand it. Now let's get back to your original question. How has this been allowed to happen? That when you have two, I would argue, the two most powerful interests in the country, the federal government on one hand, led by a partisan political person, and the very largest corporations working in concert to decide what the public will see, when they see it, and how it's positioned. It is very difficult for the public at large to perceive that that's happening, to understand that that's happening. And for that matter, it is for some journalists. And I wish I had a solution to the problem, but I do think that the public being aware of how it works, how it really works, as opposed to how those in power want you to believe that it works, is the beginning of our finding our way out of this.
There was also the pressure from the public itself as well, wasn't there? I remember shortly after 9/11, you described some of the sentiments quite vividly as though you compared it to